Her voice had once shaken a whole barn. I can't close my legs. A broken woman on a dirt floor, a cruel husband hunting her like a wolf, and a cowboy named Elias Boone who lifted her out of that nightmare and swore she would never face it again. Months passed since that day in the Kansas heat. Hannah now lived at Boone Ranch, safer than she had ever been. The bruises had faded, the tremors had eased, and the quiet peace around the ranch began to feel like a life she might deserve. But peace in the Wild West never comes without a shadow, waiting somewhere behind it. On a cool morning, Hannah sat at the edge of the bed, hands resting on her stomach, watching the sunrise paint the prairie gold. She had been dizzy for a few days, tired in a way she could not explain. Mrs. Harper clucked her tongue and sent for the doctor, saying she had seen that look on many women before. Hannah tried to laugh it off, but her fingers would not stop trembling. The doctor came back just before noon, the same quiet man with steel-gray eyes who had told her she was expecting not long ago. This time he examined her gently, asked a few more questions, then stepped back with a look that made Hannah grip the blanket tight. Her breath caught. A child. She pressed her hand over her heart as if she could steady it. Mrs. Harper gasped and began thanking the Lord right there in the room, but Hannah didn't move. A strange panic rose in her chest. She whispered, "Doctor, how far along am I? Please, tell me the truth." He studied her face, then answered in the most careful voice she had ever heard, "About 3 months, maybe a little more." Dead silent. 3 months. 3 months meant one thing. The child inside her could not belong to Elias. It belonged to the man who tore her apart, the man who swore he would drag her home in chains if he had to, Caleb Miller. Hannah felt the world tilt. Her fingers curled into the blanket until her knuckles whitened. She had escaped Caleb, escaped the screams, escaped the ropes, escaped the barn where she thought she might die. But she had not escaped him entirely. A part of him lived inside her now. Elias walked in at that moment, dust on his boots, hat still in his hand. He saw the doctor. He saw Hannah's pale face, and he knew something had shifted. He asked softly, "Hannah, what is it?" "What did he say?" She opened her mouth. No sound came out. Because she did not know how to tell the one man who saved her that she carried the child of the man who tried to destroy her. So here's the question for you. If you were Hannah, would you confess the truth to the man who rescued you, even if that truth might break his heart? Hannah sat frozen on the edge of the bed long after the doctor left. The sunlight through the window felt colder somehow, like the whole room had been tipped sideways. She kept one hand over her stomach, staring at nothing, trying to breathe slow, but every breath felt like both relief and heartbreak all tangled together. Elias stood by the doorway, hat still hanging from his fingers. His voice was gentle, the way it always was when he sensed pain he could not quite reach. "Hannah, talk to me, please." She looked up at him with red eyes. Her lips trembled, and for a second she tried to force out the truth, but the words stuck in her throat. She whispered, "Elias, I don't know how to say this. I'm so sorry, so very sorry." He sat beside her, slow and steady, as if approaching a frightened horse that might bolt at the slightest sound. He placed one hand over hers. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Not to me. Not ever." Those words made her break. Tears spilled fast, shoulders shaking, all the fear she had tried to bury rising right back to the surface. She managed to choke out, "The child, it is not yours." Her voice cracked. "It belongs to him, to Caleb." Elias did not flinch. He did not anger. He did not even look surprised. He simply nodded, like it was a truth he had already felt in his bones the moment he stepped through the door. He squeezed her hand and said, "A child is never at fault for the man who fathered it, not one bit. That child deserves a chance at a better life, and I aim to help give it that chance if you let me." Hannah cried harder, but this time her tears were different. Not fear, not shame, just a long-held weight finally being set down. She leaned into him, resting her forehead on his shoulder, breathing in the steadiness that seemed to surround him like a warm blanket. Outside the window, the prairie wind pushed through the grass like a whisper from far away, A whisper neither of them knew was carrying across Kansas plains toward a man who refused to be forgotten. About an hour later, a rider passing through Dodge City stepped into a saloon and mentioned it loud enough for half the room to hear. Said he heard Hannah Boone was expecting. Said the child might not belong to the man she lived with now. In the shadowed corner of that same saloon, Caleb Miller sat with a glass of whiskey he had not touched. His eyes darkened. He muttered under his breath, "She's carrying my son and living with that old man like they are married." He spat on the floor and muttered, "A woman forgets her place too quick when a fool thinks he can save her." And when he heard the words Hannah and expecting in the same breath, something inside him snapped in a way that was quiet but deadly. He stood up without finishing his drink and walked out the door with a purpose no man wanted to follow. So here's the real question. What will a cruel man do when he learns a child is growing in the world that he believes belongs to him? Caleb did not ride back to Abilene that day. He rode straight across town toward the courthouse with a fire in his chest that no summer heat could match. He tied his horse in front of a small office beside the courthouse. Inside sat a man folks called Mr. Danton, a clerk who knew enough law to make trouble but not enough to fix it. Caleb slammed a handful of coins on the desk and growled, "I want my wife back, and I want my child. You write whatever I need to take them home." Danton leaned back, hearing the desperation under Caleb's fury, men who lost control of the one thing they thought they owned. He dipped his pen. "We can file a petition. Say she was taken against her will. Say the child is yours by blood." Judges tend to listen when a father calls for his family. Caleb smirked, a dark twist of pride, convinced the law would stand at his side no matter what he had done in the shadows. Within an hour, the papers were signed, sealed, and slapped into his hands. Caleb rode out again, heading straight toward Boone Ranch, dust rising behind him like a warning. Back at the ranch, Hannah was resting on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket even though the sun was warm. Her face looked calmer than it had in days, her hand resting on her stomach in a way that almost seemed protective. Elias stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He stopped when he saw the fear in her eyes. Hannah whispered, "Elias, I feel it. He is coming." Before Elias could answer, Sheriff Cole's horse came tearing up the trail. He held up a folded document and said, "Boone, we have a problem. Caleb filed a petition claiming you took his wife, and the judge is forced to review it." Elias clenched his jaw. "So he is playing with the law now?" Cole nodded. "And he's coming. He was seen riding out of Dodge City with those papers in his hand. Might be here before sundown." Hannah's breath hitched. She looked from Cole to Elias like a woman standing between two storms. Elias walked to her, placed a steady hand on her shoulder, and said, "You are not going anywhere with that man. Not while I'm breathing." The wind shifted then, moving across the prairie in a slow, heavy sweep, almost like the land itself knew trouble was riding toward it. So here's the question for you. When a cruel man arrives holding the law in one hand and fury in the other, who will the judge believe when the dust settles? If you want to follow this journey to the end, tap that subscribe button nice and easy so you do not miss what comes next. And while you settle in, grab a warm cup of tea and tell me, what time is it where you are, and where are you listening from today? Caleb did not slow his horse as he approached Boone Ranch. The dust behind him rose in a long, angry trail, and even from the porch, Hannah felt the vibration of hooves pounding through her chest. Elias stepped down from the steps, calm as a man facing a storm he had already prepared for. Sheriff Cole stood beside him, hand resting near his holster but not quite on it. Caleb reined in his horse so hard the animal snorted and backed up. He held the papers out like a weapon. "I have the law on my side now. Bring Hannah out here, or I will take her myself." Hannah flinched at the sound of his voice. Elias noticed, and that was all it took for the anger in his jaw to tighten. He stepped forward a little. "Hannah stays where she is. She is safe here." Caleb spat in the dirt, glaring. "She is my wife, and that baby is my blood. You think you can hide her here? You think you can play house with another man's family?" Sheriff Cole finally spoke. "Caleb, you need to calm down. The judge has not ruled on anything yet. If you keep acting this way, you will lose whatever chance you had left. But Caleb was too far gone to hear reason. The rage in him had been simmering for months, and now it burst loose like a broken dam. He shoved past Cole and tried to march straight toward the porch. Elias moved in front of him so fast it startled even Cole. "You touched that step, and you answer to me." Elias said it quiet, but quiet words can cut sharper than a shout. Caleb swung, a wild punch thrown by a man who had lost any sense of consequence. Elias dodged it by a hair, but the movement sent Hannah stumbling back against the porch railing. The sight of her nearly falling was all it took. Cole stepped between them, shouting, "Enough!" But Caleb reached for something at his waist. Not a gun, but a length of rope. The same kind he used to tie Hannah down in that barn. Seeing it made her gasp and grab her stomach. Elias reacted first. He grabbed Caleb by the wrist, twisted his arm behind his back, and slammed him against the side post of the porch. The rope dropped to the ground. Even Cole froze. It was not the force of the move that shocked him. It was Caleb's face, twisted, not in pain, but in a kind of desperate madness. Caleb hissed, "You think you can take everything from me? You think you can take my son?" And right there, for the first time, Elias answered with absolute certainty. He said, "That child deserves better than the man who made him. And he will have better." Cole finally snapped out of it and pulled Caleb away before things went too far. He told him he was going to spend the night in a cell until the judge could sort this mess out. Caleb fought him the whole way, yelling that this was not over, not by a long shot. Hannah sank onto the porch swing, shaking, one hand on her stomach, the other covering her mouth. Elias sat beside her, letting her lean into him until her breathing slowed. But deep inside both of them was the same fear. If Caleb was willing to do this now, what would he do when the judge made his final ruling? So here's the question for you. When the truth meets the law in a town like Dodge City, which one will decide the fate of this child? Caleb spent that night in a cell, pacing like a caged animal, muttering to himself that the judge would put everything back where it belonged. But the truth was, the town had seen too much. The way Hannah flinched at his voice, the wild look in his eyes, no paper in the world could hide what he had become. The next morning, Elias and Hannah rode into Dodge City with Sheriff Cole leading the way. Hannah held her stomach with both hands, whispering to the child inside that everything would be all right soon. Elias glanced over at her now and then, and each time he did, his expression hardened with quiet determination. Inside the courthouse, Judge Wilbur waited with a stack of reports, medical notes, a statement from Mrs. Harper. Cole had gathered every witness he could reach, and Elias, without telling Hannah, had used a chunk of his savings to pay for travel fees, filing costs, and even a proper legal writer to prepare their case in clear, careful words, not to bribe the law, but to make sure the truth finally stood on solid legs. He paid only for travel fees and proper paperwork. Nothing more, nothing hidden. Caleb was brought in, still angry, still convinced that blood alone made him the winner. He argued loud, waving his arms, claiming ownership instead of love, but when Hannah stood up, the whole room fell quiet. She spoke soft, the kind of soft that carries farther than a shout. She told the judge she did not want revenge. She only wanted peace, for herself, for her child, for a life where fear no longer slept beside her at night. Judge Wilbur listened a long while before speaking. He looked at Caleb, then at Elias, then at Hannah, and finally at the stack of evidence on his desk. When he announced his ruling, his voice carried the weight of a man choosing what was right, not what was easy. Judge Wilbur granted Hannah full protection and approved her petition for divorce. He reminded the court that granting a divorce was never simple in these parts, but some cases carry a truth too heavy to ignore. He ruled that she would have full custody of the child once it was born, and that Caleb Miller was to have no contact, no visits, and no claim over her household for the rest of his life. Caleb remained the father on paper, but only in name, and the judge stated plainly that any attempt to approach Hannah or the child would land him in jail. Elias would not need a paper to stand beside them, the judge said, because some men prove their worth by the way they show up, not by the blood they share. Hannah cried softly into Elias' shoulder. Caleb shouted as the lawmen pulled him back. promising that none of this was over. But this time his voice sounded small, almost hollow, like a man shouting into an empty canyon. Months later, under the warm glow of a Kansas sunset, Hannah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Elias held the child as if he were holding the whole meaning of life in his hands. He looked down at the tiny face, then up at Hannah, and whispered so low only she could hear, "He has your eyes already." Hannah smiled through tired tears and whispered, "And he already has the best part of me." Hannah looked at them both and whispered, "We made it. We truly made it. Sometimes blood does not make a father. Sometimes kindness does. Sometimes courage does. And sometimes the people who save us become the family we were meant to have all along." Now let me ask you this. If you had lived in those days, would you have fought for a future built on love instead of fear? If this story moved you even a little, give it a like. It means more than you think. And go on and subscribe so you do not miss the next Wild West tale waiting down this dusty old trail. Pour yourself a warm cup of tea, settle in, and tell me, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it on your side of the prairie?